The 2020 Carbon Neutrality and New Economic Impetus Forum officially begins. Mr. Luo, Mr. Li, Ms. Deng, Ms. Hu, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody who's watching this online, good afternoon. I'm US TV anchor Jasmine Zeng. Thank you for attending the Carbon Neutrality and New Economic Impetus Forum co-organized by US TV and TSSA. The EU has pledged to reach carbon neutrality by 2050 in the first phase, which will begin in 2023 and last for 3 years. The carbon emissions associated with imported products such as steel, aluminium, and cement will have to be reported. Once the EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, becomes fully operational in 2026, importers will have to purchase certificates to pay for the carbon emissions of the imported products. Is Taiwan ready for the change? According to a survey, 57.1% of Taiwanese businesses have not started to work on a plan to reduce emissions and transform. As high as about 80% of businesses also admitted that they did not know how to calculate their carbon emissions. For Taiwanese businesses, net zero emissions is no longer just about becoming more competitive, but about survival. Our government has announced that Taiwan will pursue net zero by 2050, and the government will also unveil its short, medium, and long-term goals. The government would help businesses enhance their ability to cut carbon emissions. In today's forum, we'll discuss how much businesses can do and what they should do in order to achieve net zero. Next up, allow me to introduce you to the guests today. If I call your name, please wave to the audience. First of all, Mr. Luo Dasheng, Deputy Mayor of Kaohsiung. Ms. Deng Meihua, Vice President of US TV. Mr. Lin Zhiqing, Secretary General of Taiwan Smart City Solutions Alliance, or TSSA. Dr. Cao Fanghai, CEO of the Southern Region Campus of the Industrial Technology Research Institute. Dr. Christine Hu, Director of US TV News. And now business leaders. Mr. Wang Xiqing, President of CSC. Mr. Xu Zhaohua, Vice President of Taiwan Power Company. Lastly, Mr. Zhou Guangchun, Senior Vice President, ASE Group. Once again, a round of applause for our distinguished guests. As we kick off today's forum, may I invite Dr. Christine Hu from US TV News onto the stage to give us the opening remarks. There are a lot of fans here today. Can you wave to us? You are all here to see Dr. Hu, I'm sure. Welcome. Mr. Luo, Mr. Cao, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to speak here. I also want to welcome you to the Carbon Neutrality and New Economic Impetus Forum co-hosted by us and also TSSA. I guess a lot of you will probably want to know what carbon neutrality means. What it means is that when a country, a company, a product, an organization, a family, or an individual generates CO2 emissions, whether directly or indirectly, the emissions will have to be offset by actions such as planting trees or generating green energy. So this is what carbon neutrality means. And carbon neutrality is no longer just a slogan. It's a very important issue that all of us has to tackle. Taiwan has already pledged to reach carbon neutrality. Now we have two deadlines, 2030 and 2050. If you are not able to reach carbon neutrality by this deadline, then your country will be a pariah. Your businesses will not be able to access funding In fact, Cathay United Financial Holdings has already said that no ESG, no business, and no ESG, no money. So without taking ESG seriously, you will not be able to access funding. And TSMC yesterday also urged the government to set up a carbon trading platform. So carbon neutrality is a very important issue, but how are we going to achieve this goal? In today's forum, I'm going to discuss this issue with government officials and also business leaders in order to understand, first of all, what Taiwanese businesses have done in order to achieve carbon neutrality. In addition, we also have to talk about how we tackle this challenge. Now, we also will discuss how we can overcome the weaknesses and how we tackle the bottlenecks. But other than that, we'll also talk about the opportunities arising from carbon neutrality. I'm sure Taiwan will be able to achieve this goal. Once again, thank you very much for coming to this forum. I hope that this will be a very inspiring forum for all of you. Thank you, Dr. Hu. We are here in the city of Kaohsiung, and Kaohsiung is also a leader in the efforts to tackle carbon emissions. So let's welcome the Deputy Mayor of Kaohsiung, Mr. Luo Dasheng. I know that Mr. Luo has a PhD in management, and you have played a very important role in Taiwan's transformation. Welcome. Ms. Deng from US TV, Dr. Hu, Dr. Cao from ITRI, and also Mr. Lin from TSSA, Mr. Xu from Taipao Company, Mr. Zhou from ASE Group. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Just as Dr. Hu said, carbon neutrality is a very important issue. It's a global issue because we need to tackle the challenge of climate change, and we have to keep the increase of temperature below 1.5 degrees Celsius, and it's a global goal, including Kaohsiung. Kaohsiung is an industrial city, and as we move towards net zero emissions, we have invested a lot of resources. In 2020, relative to 2005, we already cut carbon emissions by 19.4%. This is actually higher than the government's goal of a 10% reduction, almost twice as much as the national target. But we cannot be complacent. We have to do even more. So we are also calling on everyone to help us. We are now adopting a lot of measures in order to achieve the goal of carbon neutrality. For example, in our transportation infrastructure, we are extending the metro line and also building a new metro line. Last week, Premier Su Zhenchang from the cabinet visited Kaohsiung, and our new metro line was also approved. So this the public transportation will help us cut carbon emissions. In addition, we also have a bike sharing program. In addition, we are providing subsidies to e-scooters and e-buses. So all these are our efforts to try to cut carbon emissions. In terms of waste management, in fact, in Kaohsiung, we have 4 incinerators, and we have to recycle 100% of the slag from our incinerator. In our manufacturing sector, we are also pushing through new measures. As I mentioned earlier, we are an industrial city, and we have to try to recycle both energy and waste. We hope to reduce waste and really make use of all the waste and turn waste into resources. I think many of you also know that we have a very big petrochemical industry. We also have a thriving steel industry. In fact, today we have representatives from both CPC and CSC. In their manufacturing processes, they produce a lot of CO2. So we also have to use the carbon capture technology, and we can also use hydrogen and recycle catalysts. And this way we can produce methane in an environmentally friendly way. So these are some of the things that we have been doing. I believe that in this area, Taiwan is already a leader in the world. In our agriculture, we are also using different technologies to use biogas to generate power, and we have been rather successful in this area as well. In our 6 major sectors, manufacturing, agriculture, residential, commercial, transportation, and environmental. In these 6 sectors, we came up with 56 measures in order to cut 30% of carbon emissions relative to the 2005 level by 2030. And I believe that this will also create a solid foundation upon which we can do even more. Once again, I want to thank US TV for organizing this forum in the Smart City Summit and Expo. I hope that in this forum, we can raise awareness so that the private sector and the government can work together to cut carbon emissions. And I think that this will also be a good forum for us to brainstorm for new measures. Lastly, I wish the conference a great success, and I wish all of you great health. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Luo. Kaohsiung is indeed a leader. You have new e-bus fleets, and you have also cut carbon emissions by almost 20%, and you also have PV installations. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Cao Fanghai from ITRI onto the stage to say a few words. In your 2030 strategic map, ITRI already sets out a lot of measures. Dear guests, leaders of the business, Mr. Luo, Deputy Mayor of Kaohsiung, everyone here, good afternoon. I think usually we start by saying to each other, wow, what a nice day. But these days we might say, oh, it's really hot, or we might say the weather is really strange. And this is because we are increasingly threatened by extreme weather patterns. This is why every one of us has to think about how to tackle this issue, and we also have to take action. As the Deputy Mayor said, Kaohsiung is a metropolis, and it's also an industrial city. So it's very important for Kaohsiung to cut carbon emissions. For individuals, if we want to cut our emissions, we can try to change our means of transportation. We should also do something to retrofit our buildings. But if we are talking about a sector, it is actually quite complex to cut carbon emissions, because we also have to tackle an international supply chain, and we have to think about border taxes, tariffs. Perhaps some businesses are still waiting and see to decide whether they need to do something. But what I can tell you is that in 2023 at the earliest, or in 2026 at the latest, we have to face up to the carbon neutrality issue. So it's not about whether you should do something about it. You should start right now. And from an industry point of view, as Mr. Luo said, Kaohsiung is already ahead. And this will also play an important role in the future of southern Taiwan. So usually we have to look at 4 aspects if we want to cut carbon emissions. The first one is we have to increase the use of renewable energy. The second one is enhance energy efficiency. We also need to cut carbon emissions, and we have to capture carbon and store carbon as well. So basically, you have to purchase green energy. You also have to increase your energy efficiency, and you have to take inventory of your carbon footprints, and within your company you also have to transform. Once you've done all of this, if you are still behind your goals, you have to purchase carbon credits. So I think from an industrial point of view, this is what you have to do. And Dr. Hu is also here. What you have to do is not just looking at existing technologies, you also have to look at some new opportunities. And I believe that this will help you as well. At ITRI, we are very happy to share our research results with industries. I know that many industries are already working on sensors and also smart machinery, Internet of Things. If you are already working on these technologies, I think that you already have a good start. So basically, what you have to do is that you need to import the data of your carbon footprints into what you are already doing. So I would encourage you to take action as fast as possible.
So what is one of the new opportunities is the electrification of transportation vehicles. What does that mean? It means a lot to automobile makers. You have to use new materials and technologies, new components, and all the supporting business models and services must adapt to this new electrification trend. So if you can catch up with this trend, I think you will thrive in the future. And I think Taiwan is strong in terms of our manufacturing sectors and ICT sectors. So if we can work with international partners, I think we are going to enjoy success. Taiwanese people are hardworking. So we are going to play an important role in the international markets if we continue to work hard, and ITRI will work with you. Thank you, Mr. Cao from ITRI. I think Kaohsiung is special in that it combines both emerging and traditional sectors, and if Kaohsiung works very hard moving towards carbon neutrality. And at today's forum, I would like to invite our guests to take a group photo. So I would like to invite Mr. Luo Dashen, Deputy Mayor of Kaohsiung, and Mr. Mei Hua, Vice President of USTV, Mr. Lin Zhiqing, Secretary General of the TSSA, Dr. Cao Fanghai, CEO of the Southern Region Campus of ITRI, Dr. Christine Hu, Director of USTV News, Mr. Wang Xiqing, President of CSC, Mr. Xu Zaohua, Vice President of Thai Power Company, Mr. Zhou Guangchun, Senior Vice President of the ASE Group. Give them a big round of applause. We are going to take a group photo for this very important moment. Please look at the camera in the front. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Another shot from the camera in the back. Look at the cameras in the back. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Give us your best smile and a thumbs up. Look at the camera in the front. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you all. Please return to your seat as we will proceed with our keynote speeches. The National Development Council is going to publish a roadmap for Taiwan to achieve net zero emissions by 2030. This roadmap is going to show us very clearly what we should do as big corporations and as SMEs. And the government has also had this instruction that we shall start with bigger corporations who will then set examples and lead SMEs. So what will they do? We are very happy to have invited representatives from the CSC. Our first speaker is Mr. Wang Xiqing. So the CSC is going to replace their 6 blast furnace with smart furnaces to achieve their goal of reducing carbon by 7%. Organizer, Dr. Hu, fellow speakers, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm really honored to be invited to today's forum, and I would like to take this opportunity to share with you what we have been doing at CSC in dealing with climate change and carbon neutrality. What are our strategies? What are our responses? So the steel industry is facing up to the challenges of low carbon and sustainability. Well, last August, the UN IPCC published their 6th assessment report, and it includes very specific statistics showing us that climate change has been increasingly serious and billions of people are at immediate risks. And earlier than the publication, Bill Gates also published a new book called How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. He says it's simple, carbon neutrality, by achieving carbon neutrality. However, this is going to be human beings' biggest and most difficult challenges. Why? Because all sectors must work toward this goal, whether it is a steel company, a petrol company, like our guests. So we all have different production processes. How can we reach carbon neutrality in our own way? This is going to be the biggest challenge of all. So as we face increasingly stringent climate change, my industry faces tough challenges in terms of environmental protection and carbon reduction, not only from government regulations, but also pressure, stress from our customers, from our investors, and also NGOs or even foreign governments. So we face stress from all aspects, and we have a renewable energy regulation in Taiwan. It regulates that as energy-intensive users, you have to reduce your use of energy or you have to buy green energies. And the government has set this pathway toward carbon neutrality by 2050, and as intensive energy users, we must pay for carbon credits. And a lot of investors have joined initiatives such as RE100 and Climate Action 100. They have been imposing requirements on us. And also CBAM was mentioned by Dr. Hu. This is a border control measure that includes carbon tariffs. So if we want to export our products to Europe, we have to pay carbon tariffs. So many challenges, so many requirements have made us to rethink about carbon reduction and energy conservation. They are no longer just limited to environmental issues. As a business, we have to think about our survival in the global supply chain. So it is an economic issue. It involves all sectors in the economy, and it involves the survival. It is about the survival of businesses. So I have been hearing about people's impression about the steel industry and the cement industry. People think we are big polluters. This is not true. So I have to say something for my industry, for the steel industry. So this chart shows you the most widely used construction materials. So steel is the biggest, the most widely used material, only next to cement. So it is 4 times more than plastics and 15 times more than all other metals. So this is the most widely used material, steel. Why? There are 2 reasons. First, steel comes with a lot of strengths. Well, of course, it is strong and it is tough, and also it is highly. It has high formability. It has high weldability, and also it enjoys good magnetic conductivity. That is why it is an important material for adapters and motors. So it is strong in so many aspects, and also it is inexpensive. For 1 kilogram of steel, it is less than $20. So it enjoys so many good qualities, but it is cheap. That is why it is so widely used across all sectors. Now, facing the issue of environmental friendliness and carbon reduction, it is environmental friendly. It can be 100% recycled. It is a green material. It is 10% more recyclable than aluminium. And also, if you look at the emission of the unit emission of steel, it is actually lower than any other metals, 1/6 of aluminium and 1/20 of titanium. So we are confident that steel can be a pillar in energy transformation. The thing is that the consumption of steel is so much. It's 1.855 billion tons consumed across the world. And that is why our carbon or GHG emissions are so high in the steel sector. So there's a lot to be done. We must try hard to reduce carbon emissions during steel production so that steel can be a more eco-friendly green material. This will support the future development of human civilizations and also reduce environmental burden. So with that recognition, what have we done at the CSC? A few years ago, we initiated our 5G, 5 Greens strategies. First is to promote green process and to produce green products. The third is to work with green partners to work together toward circular economy. Then the fourth is to invest in green businesses, And the fifth strategy is to promote green living. And based on the 5 strategies, we have launched several initiatives to increase our green performance and green business opportunities so that we can work for a greener environment. Well, I'm going to share with you some case studies. The first is about green process. So we use coking coals and iron ores in our end-to-end process. So once they go through the coking process, they are put into our blast furnace to reduce the iron ore into molten iron, and then they are put into our converters for steel making to produce harder steel, and then they are cooled down to be produced as a steel billet. And with some inspection and some service treatment, the billets are reheated in the reheating furnace to 1200 degrees Celsius and going through a series of processes, including annealing and tempering, before we get steels to be used to produce automobiles and motors. So it takes more than 10 days to go from ingredients to final products, a total of 15 stages in the process. And it involves high pressure and high heat. And there are byproducts such as furnace gases from converters, from blast furnaces, and also waste heat. And we recycle these waste elements to be used in our power generation. So we generate powers, and that accounts for 15.6% of our energy mix. So we try our best to find opportunities to reduce carbon in our production process. Actually, we initiated more than 1,163 carbon reduction initiatives over the past 10 years. So we reduced carbon by 1.35 million tons CO2 per year. So every year there are more than 100 initiatives. So what have we done? Here's a list of them. So we take diversified approaches such as optimizing our production and streamlining the production processes, adjusting the temperature in a smarter way, and going through all the processes from steel making to rolling. So we have been strategically taking inventory of all possible ways to reduce carbon and to introduce the newest technologies to come up with innovative ideas to reduce emissions. So what we have been doing may be little, but we have achieved something by accumulating all the small success, and we have always worked to achieve better. And we will push forward even more initiatives in this carbon reduction efforts.
Right, let me give you another example. The blast furnace iron making process is a core process for us. At CSC, we have 4 blast furnaces, so we have 10 million tons of production. 75% of our emissions are from our blast furnaces, so we have to cut emissions here. Blast furnaces are very big. They have a volume of 3,400 cubic meters, equivalent to 2 swimming pools. And the temperature can be as high as 2,000 degrees Celsius, and the pressure is also very high. So sometimes we jokingly call the blast furnaces black boxes. It's difficult to see what's going on inside the blast furnaces. And this is why we also make use of AI and IoT technologies. We installed advanced sensors in order to see what is going on inside the blast furnaces. We put all these data together, so now we are also using big data technologies. We have 27 modules, and they can provide valuable information for us to make decisions. Because of this system, we are now able to predict what is going on in the blast furnaces. And our efficiency is also enhanced. At the same time, we have been able to cut carbon emissions. So AI technology can be applied in many different areas in the manufacturing process as well. At CSC, we have been using AI in various manufacturing processes. We are also using AI in our management and also other business areas. Now, another example is green steel. What does that mean? Let's take an example. Electrical steel for vehicles is an example that we can talk about. So by using such green steel products, we are able to increase energy efficiency, and the motors made using electrical steel also consumes less oil. Last year, we in fact produced 4.56 million tons of such electrical steel. Oh, sorry, I only have 2 minutes left. And by using such green products, we help consumers cut carbon emissions by 8.48 million tons. Okay, another example. This is super energy efficient electrical steel. Now, this kind of material is used in electrical vehicles. You need something that can help you reduce the use of energy. It also has to have a small volume. And I think at CSC, we are very fortunate. We are working with a leading electric vehicle company, starting with T. We've been working with this company for 15 years, their Model S, and so on. We supply steel materials for them to produce motors. And you can see that we have developed new generations of such electrical steel sheets. So the sheets are becoming thinner and thinner from 0.35 meters all the way down to 0.2 meters. So we've been working with Tesla, and in terms of EV motors, our market share is actually 30%. Now, in terms of our company, our steel products make up 1% of the global market. But if we are talking specifically about the kind of steel for electrical vehicle, our market share is 30%. Now, in the future, CSC will continue to provide higher quality materials to other companies. I think this is not only good for our company, but also good for our partners. Now, because of time constraints, I have to jump ahead. Now, we are working with green partners and share resources with each other. Now, this network is the biggest in Taiwan. Now, if we can share resources, then these other partners in the network don't have to also generate their own steam. For example, last year we actually sold a lot of excess steam, and this helped cut CO2 emissions by 380,000 tons. Okay, so I shared with you a few examples of how we cut carbon emissions. And last year, we started to see the mounting pressure of carbon neutrality. Every month, I meet up with government ministers. We are also working with foreign experts, and we spent a whole year to devise our roadmap to carbon neutrality. we have short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. So before 2050, in the first phase, we will still try to cut carbon emissions, but as we move closer to 2050, we have to do more and more. Last year was our first year. Last year, we completed 251 projects. We cut carbon emissions by 1.3%, twice as much as before. And this is because, as I said, there's mounting pressure. And because of this pressure, I think we are, in fact, coming up with even more ideas. Now, in terms of medium-term and long-term goals, here you can see two phases. First of all, we need to move to low carbon, and then we will move to zero carbon. So this is what I just talked about. This is our roadmap. Before 2030, we will still continue using blast furnaces, but we have 4 measures to make our blast furnaces low carbon furnaces. We used to have to rely on iron ore, but in the future we can use more reduced iron to replace iron ore. This is also a measure for us to cut carbon emissions. Secondly, we used to have to use pulverized coal, but we can use hydrogen to replace pulverized coal. And this is also a measure for us to turn our blast furnaces into low carbon furnaces. Now, in order to achieve zero carbon, we also have to use carbon capture and storage. Another method is something that is being developed in Europe. It's a completely new process. So basically, they use hydrogen, and then eventually they are able to produce zero carbon steel. So by 2040 or 2050, we can have both processes. But what will be their percentage? Basically, we will try to retain our blast furnaces, but they have to be zero carbon furnaces. Now, this is because if we want to produce high quality steel, we still have to use blast furnaces and converters. So we tend to want to retain these facilities. It's just that we have to make them zero carbon. Right. So we've already come up with a roadmap, but of course, in the future, we still have to tackle challenges in terms of technologies, resources, and capital. At National Cheng Kung University in southern Taiwan, we've already set up a hydrogen metallurgy center. And this center brings together 10 institutions and 20 experts who are doing research in this area. In addition, we are also working with other partners. We use the CO1 and CO2. We use the CO and CO2 that we produce, and we use them as resources. And this way, we don't have to use other types of chemical. So basically, this is a circular economy model. Now, CO and CO2 are our waste, but for petrochemical industries, CO and CO2 are in fact materials. So this is like turning waste into food. This concludes my presentation. I know that my time is running out, so I'm going to cut short. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Mr. Wang, for your presentation. For every industry, if you want to transform to a low-carbon model, you still need to think about power. So our next speaker is Mr. Xu Zhaohua, Vice President from Taiwan Power Company. He's been working at Taipower for more than 30 years, and he's going to talk about the future of future utilities.
Organizer, moderator, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be back in my hometown. Actually, I was born in Zuoying, Kaohsiung. I grew up here. I'm going to share with you what Taipower has been doing in terms of our transformation. Well, I've been listening to Mr. Wang, and I actually also checked Mr. Zhou from the ASC's topic. So I think all of us take zero carbon as a way to transform ourselves, as a new opportunity. So I think in 137 countries, people have pledged to move toward zero emissions. Some will achieve it by 2050, but some says that they're going to do it by 2045. Well, in China, it's going to be 2060. But anyway, 2050 is going to be a milestone. And I think we all share one view, which is that if we want to mitigate climate change, we must keep global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius. That is to say, we will have to reduce carbon emissions by 45% compared with the 2010 level. And previously, the NDC was reviewed once every 5 years, but now it is going to be reviewed once every year. And people have been talking about coal-fired generation plant. At the COP26 meeting, they have rephrased the term from phased out to phased down. That is to say, coal-fired generation has to be reduced gradually. And also, President Tsai has made an announcement about the 2050 goal, and this is going to be incorporated in our legislation. So the government has made a public announcement, and also so did Premier Su. And also, the MOEA has launched the initiative. That is why there is a 2x2 structure, which will help us to move from low carbon to zero carbon. And this will need to be supported by energy as well as industrial sectors. So how do we move from low carbon to zero carbon by using this 2x2 structure? So this is going to be the focus of my presentation today. If we want to move from low carbon to zero carbon, we are going to address 3 aspects. Well, I think you're about the same age as me. If you remember the trend in our childhood, coal was fired, but then trains were electrified, so we started to use electricity. So while trains used to produce a lot of carbons, since they went through electrification, the carbon emissions went to Taipower Company. Well, now if you take high-speed rail, it is powered by electricity. In the old days, vehicles were powered by diesel, and now the carbon emissions has been transferred to the Taipower Company. And the deputy mayor talked about the metro lines, and who will shoulder the responsibility of carbon emissions of these transportation vehicles. It is also the Taipower Company. That is why we must work hard in carbon reduction for everybody. We are going to play a very important role. So what is our biggest priority? Is to make use of available technology and reduce emissions per kilowatt hour of electricity. we generate, and that is what we call a power generation coefficient. Well, for every kilowatt hours, we are going to generate 0.65 kilograms of carbon emissions. How do we reduce that? On the supply side, we would like to increase the use of natural gas and reduce costs, because the emission of natural gas is only 50% of coals. So if we can increase the use of energy, we can reduce our emissions. And our second priority is going to use renewables, which produces no emissions.
来下降。
So as we increase the use of natural gas, we are going to reduce carbon emissions. However, natural gas is still a fossil fuel. So what are we going to do? We're going to use hydrogen. Hydrogen is a green energy. We can mix hydrogen with natural gas so that we can reduce the amount of natural gas used. And also, ammonia will be added to our coals. And by doing that, we can also reduce our carbon emissions. So we increase natural gas and reduce coals and use alternative fuels. What else can we do? We can also tap into the technologies of carbon sequestration. That is to say, carbon is captured, stored, and reused. This is our strategy on the supply side. So we are going to introduce a large amount of renewables. And imagine by 2050, what is the percentage of green energies in our energy mix? Well, in advanced country, what is their goal? What is by 2050, it's going to be by 2025, it's going to be 20%, but by 2050, it's going to be around 50%. So when green energies are introduced into our grid, the grid is going to be more resilient, has to be more resilient. With resilient grids, we can enjoy resilient renewable energies. That is to say, we can have more flexible uses of these energies. So we need to introduce smarter grids, decarbonized grids, and also introduce power storage technologies. This is a buzzword, right? Power storage. And it is going to contribute to carbon reduction, and it's going to be a business opportunity. And we have been developing a lot of green energies. What about the power generation at our coal-fired generation plants? Because you've used all the green energies, we still have to rely on coals. So demand side is going to be important. You have to reduce your power use to reduce the demand, to increase energy efficiency. So our strategies include supply, grid, and demand to help us to achieve the 2050 goal. Is it going to be difficult? Yes, it's difficult across the world, not just in Taiwan. Well, by 2050, there is going to be 28 years ahead. There is also going to be a lot of technological development. That is why we have to set ambitious goals. So I've already mentioned the conclusions. I'll skip this. What is the key to carbon reduction? It's forward-looking technologies. They are yet to come. They could be expensive. That is why we have to make use. We have to start with technologies available, such as PVs and offshore wind farms. Offshore wind is going to be important because our land area is small, but we are surrounded by vast ocean, and it's going to be, like I said, renewable energies are going to account for more than 50% of our energy mix, and we are going to focus on offshore wind. And of course, at the same time, we have to develop smarter grids and also we have to manage demands. And we're not just paying lip services. Next month, we are going to sign an MOU with Siemens on natural gas hydrogen mix at Xingda Power Plant in Kaohsiung. We're going to work with Siemens. So at a natural gas power plant, we are going to add 5% of hydrogen into the natural gas and see how things goes in our gas turbine generators. And also, we are going to sign an MOU with Mitsubishi Heavy Industries in this December to add ammonia into our coals for power generation. What about carbon capture? Yes, we have R&D projects. We are soliciting contractors at the moment through a tender. So in the earlier days, we are going to capture 2,000 tons. This may seem a lot, but actually it's so little compared with our overall power generation. So 2,000 tons by 2025, but then 1 million tons by 2035. This is still not sufficient, but we are going to start small and then scale up, because we want to validate technology feasibility in the beginning. And like Mr. Wang said, he was talking about the use of carbon. But to the Thai power company, what's more important is carbon capture and storage, because we don't use much of the carbon. So we are going to focus on the storage of the carbon, while those of you working in the industry might want to look into the use of these captured carbons. And I was talking about resilient grids. Yes, we have a demonstration project in Kinmen. Because the island is smaller, it's going to be easier for us to run a demonstration project. There is PV, there's power storage, and wind power. We run a trial there before we introduce these technologies to the main island of Taiwan. And also, we use drones for pylon inspection. Like I said, the use of smart technologies is going to be important for carbon reduction, and we use apps. Like I was saying, we also have to tackle the demand side. We have to know our users better. That is why we have introduced smart meters, especially in Kaohsiung. So a lot of people have been asking me, do I get to cut my electricity bills if I use meters? Well, if you buy a medical device, does that reduce your blood pressure? No, it just helps you to check your blood pressure. And then with that knowledge, you can change your habits. And you can, works very similar to smart meters. By installing smart meters, you know your patterns of using electricity. With that knowledge, you can change your habits. And then with that knowledge, we also introduce new pricing schemes, such as the time pricing schemes. For example, in peak hours, we are going to charge you more, so to discourage you from using electricity. But in off-peak hours, the unit price is going to be lower, so this provides incentives for people to change their power usage carbons. And also, with captured carbon, it could be used to grow microalgae, and that microalgae can be used to produce cosmetic products. Good for ladies. So my conclusion, the utmost important thing is to stabilize power supply. Of course, we want to be more eco-friendly, but at the same time, you want reasonable costs. You want reasonable energy prices. So we have to balance the two aspects, reasonable costs and stabilized power supply and carbon reduction will be our focuses at the same time. So this is my conclusion. All sectors will form an ecosystem connected by power. So the transportation sector is going to be going through electrification. And also in the steelmaking sector, the furnaces are powered by electricity. And all the trades, all the flows of information are going from one sector to another sector in this ecosystem. So there is going to be a lot of changes across sectors, and that is where you can find business opportunities. Well, of course, at the Thai Power, we are under a lot of pressure, and we are going to try our best. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Xu. Well, speaking of important international players, we have to talk about the ASE because they have a lot of international customers. That is why we are now going to welcome Mr. Casey Zhou, Senior Vice President of the ASE Group. So,
carbon neutrality is something that every one of us has to work on. So what is ASE doing? Let's listen to Mr. Zhou. Dear organizers, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow speakers, good afternoon. I'm Casey Zhou from ASE Group. I've been working at ASE for 28 years. Mr. Xu is from the power utilities, whereas we are a power consumer and we consume a lot of power. So in my presentation, I'll talk about how we try to conserve energy and try to cut our energy consumption. And I'll also talk to you about what other countries have been doing in order to achieve net zero by 2050. The title of my presentation is the technology sector's mission as green manufacturers. So my presentation will be mostly from a manufacturer's point of view, especially a semiconductor company's point of view. Our company has already pledged to cut our emissions to zero by 2050, but we are not the only one. In fact, among the world's top 2,000 companies, 1/3 already made the promise. And you can see that in June last year, many companies across sectors already promised to achieve net zero. So you can see many different sectors on this slide. Right here, you can see that utilities, 48% of the companies pledged to achieve net zero. And then you can also see when they hope to achieve the goal. And you can see ICT industry, 29% of the companies already made a pledge to reach net zero by 2037. However, a lot of companies are still not making the pledge yet. So we looked at the leading companies. For example, Coca-Cola promised to cut carbon emissions by 2050, cut their emissions to zero. And Coca-Cola produces carbonated drinks. So, of course, they use a lot of CO2. Now, Pepsi follows suit as well because their rival, Coca-Cola, already made a promise. So, Pepsi promised to achieve net zero by 2040. So, you can see that leading companies are also competing with each other in making net zero promise. If you want to attract clients, if you want people to buy from you, you have to cut your carbon emissions. But of course, you can not just pay lip service. You also have to take action. Now, why did we start to try to conserve energy and cut carbon emissions. This was not entirely due to international pressure. In fact, back in 2007, we already took inventory of our energy use because we wanted to cut down our energy use. And at the time, we were going to build our K-12 factory, and we were thinking about whether we could build a green building. And in 2010, we disclosed our product carbon footprint according to the past 2050 standards. And 2 years ago, 2020, we started to introduce internal carbon pricing. And our board also linked our remuneration to our environmental targets. And this is our organizational structure. So within our group, there is ASE, there's also SPIL and USI. And you can see that under every company is a sustainability committee. And in our factories, we also have sustainability committees. In terms of carbon inventory taking, basically we look at 3 scopes. Scope 1 refers to emissions generated by ourselves. So you can see that our Scope 1 emissions is a bit lower. Scope 2 covers the energy that we use. So, as I mentioned earlier, we are a very big power consumer. So you can see that our Scope 2 emissions are higher than Scope 1. And then there's also Scope 3. Scope 3 refers to the indirect emissions coming from transportation and so on. So we can really work on Scope 1 because it is generated by ourselves, but we also have to do more. Our promise is to cut 35% emissions by 2030, and this covers Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. While we try to cut our carbon emissions, we also have to try to recycle. And we have to try to influence our partners in the supply chain so that they can move to cut carbon emissions as well. And we use a lot of materials. If our materials come from high carbon emitting sources, then we have to rethink other sources of our materials. Okay, so I mentioned 3 scopes of emissions. This is Scope 1. And previously, other speakers also talked about the importance of doing something little by little. So here you can see that we are really looking at every aspect, including our facilities and also transportation. In our production process, we use certain specialty gases, and they have very high carbon intensity, about 6,500 times the intensity of CO2. This specialty gas is very stable. It's called CF4. So if it is emitted to the atmosphere, it takes 50,000 years to before the specialty gas is decomposed. So we have to tackle CF4. Now, here you can see that in this process, we have to look at how we deal with CF4. And originally, we used a microwave to deal with a CF4. But now, we use a different process. And in order to use a different process, we actually have to replace the old facilities. Okay, and then this is Scope 2 emissions. We have to look at our power intensity. Starting from 2015 to now, you can see that the figure, the power intensity, in fact, decreased from 0.373 US dollars to 0.264. And last year, we saved 8.5% of energy. So we are determined to cut our energy use, and it really requires the cooperation of everyone in our company so that we can cut our energy use. And then Scope 3 emissions, in fact, have to do with how we engage with our supply chain partners. We have to try to influence our suppliers, saying to them that if they don't cut carbon emissions, then they will not get any orders from us. So I think this is our influence as a purchaser. And by influencing our partners in the supply chain, we can also cut our Scope 3 emissions. We have done a lot, and we have won certain international awards. So we have to learn from others, but we can also compete with others internationally. Now, if we compete with leading companies around the world, I believe that we can always learn something from them. So it's not to say that we win this award and then suddenly everything is okay. We have to continue to learn. And although we've won these awards, I think this actually makes us think more about what more we have to do. So we really have to learn a lot. We are not the best, and we can always do better. Okay, so on this slide, you can see our greenhouse gas intensity. And you can see that over the years, the numbers have been coming down. But we are also expanding our factories. So that said, the total amount of emissions may be increasing, even though the intensity is dropping. So it's very difficult to achieve net zero. We have to do more. Now, this is the conclusion. We need support from senior management so that we can set very concrete goals. In addition, we need to have a transparent carbon disclosure mechanism if we want to reduce carbon, and we have to involve other stakeholders. We need to give them access to the emissions data. And also, technology innovation is key to carbon neutrality. Carbon finance, biofuels, clean hydrogen, and carbon capture and sequestration are all technologies that will help us. This concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. Well, I still have a little bit of time, right? Can I say something to... Okay, so in fact, this is a garbage bag. We haven't mass-produced the plastic bag. Now, in our company, we have a lot of packaging materials. So every year, we have about 6 million tons of waste material. And Mr. Luo mentioned that there are 4 incinerators in Kaohsiung. We provide waste plastic to recyclers. They make the waste into plastic pellets. And then they also added some organic fragrance. So this garbage bag actually smells very pleasant. And I also want to show you a picture. So while this is our chairman, and that one is our CEO. So you can see that they all have these garbage bags. And we are thinking that perhaps we can give our clients or guests these garbage bags as souvenirs. And so what I want to say is that senior management's support is very important. Thank you, Mr. Zhou. We are very happy to have all these leading companies from Taiwan to share with us what they have been doing in their journey to cut carbon emissions and reach carbon neutrality. Our last speaker is Mr. Li Shunqing, President and Acting Chairman of CPC. As EVs are gaining market share, what is CPC doing in order to respond to energy transformation? Let's welcome him.
Moderator, organizer, my fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Well, the CPC has received a lot of support from stakeholders. We're celebrating our 76th anniversary, and we are always working according to the principle of ESG and social inclusion and corporate governance. And in the future, we have to respond to the challenges of climate change globally, and we will continue to work with all stakeholders. For our younger generation, we work together to build a zero-emission sustainable future for the younger generations. So in my presentation today, I'm going to focus on the company's pathway toward transformation. I always tell my colleagues that we have to work on high-quality oil products, carbon reduction, and energy conservation, the EVA. And also, we are importing carbon-neutralized crude oil, and we're going to launch our first carbon-neutralized petrol station, and you're all going to be witness to my company's efforts in carbon neutrality. Well, actually, back in 2005, our benchmark year, the Scope 1 and 2 emissions was 11.58 million tons. How about the figure in 2021? That's only 7.11 million tons. That was a 38.6% of reduction. And we are still going to increase carbon emissions and energy efficiency so that we can reach the goal of zero emissions. I know it's going to be tougher and tougher. So ultimately, we will have to tap into CCUS in order to reach zero emissions, because we need to offset all the carbons. Well, we spend a lot of money. Well, starting from 2021 to 2025, we have 34 projects and more than 5 billion Taiwan dollars to reduce carbons by 370,000 tons. So we have three strategies, and the ultimate goal is to develop hydrogen, because that is key to the ultimate zero emission. So I'm going to show you some slides to present what we have been doing. You know all these challenges, waste in ocean. Back earlier this year in Kenya, the UN organized its 5th environmental conference, and more than 100 countries had signed an agreement saying that starting from 2024, there is going to be a global convention on plastic reduction. This is binding, and this shows that globally people have been becoming increasingly aware of this. And like our MC said, what if one day we can no longer sell petrol? So in our production process, we're going to turn crude oil into petrochemical products, and our petrol stations are going to be converted into charging stations for EVs. They're going to be smarter. In the future, you can go to our petrol stations for EV charging, for hydrogen charging. So we are going to diversify our businesses. Well, globally, petrol companies have been working on these initiatives, and similarly, that's what we are doing. We are going to focus on high-quality oil products, energy conservation, and carbon reduction. This is how we transform ourselves for a petrol-free future. Transformation is for our future generation. So I've been talking about my 3 strategies: high value added petrochemicals, crude oil to chemicals is a new trend for global refineries. Well, in the earlier days, you need to go through a lot of processes to get petrochemicals. But now with new processes, crude oil can be converted to chemicals directly. So that is why we have been restructuring ourselves to reduce oil products as fuels and increase oil products as materials. So we have been reducing our production of gasoline and increase new production processes. And also, I'm going to show you our smarter petrol stations. We're going to provide diversified energies. Hydrogen will be our focus, especially green hydrogen. Renewable energies are also our focus. We have been working in line with the EPA's rules because the EPA regulates that if you are a energy-intensive user, you need to use at least 10% of renewable energies. We use around 244 megawatts of power, and then we are an early bird in the project. So instead of the 10%, we get a 20% discount. So that's 19.6 megawatt of new renewables that we have to use. And at our company, we have EMP, and that is our strength. And also, exploration is our strength. We are working with Bestlow, which is a geothermal company. We work with the Taiwan Cement's green power company. We have cooperative initiatives with them, and we are going to invest in green energies, including geothermal. And also, we tap into CCU and CCS, carbon storage, carbon capture. This will be crucial to our goal of zero emissions. So basically, the idea is to have more fine chemicals, fine chemicals to be used as materials in the semiconductor sector. For example, the Changchun company is a crucial supplier to TSMC. So the petrochemical industry provides important materials to semiconductor industries. So without fine chemicals, we cannot support our semiconductor industries with an industrial corridor. Well, nowadays, if we use the new models, we can achieve at least 40% of petrochemical products. And at the companies with the best technology, they can even reach 70%. And also, we have to move toward hydrogen-based industries. For example, there is a science park dedicated to the new material industry. And as you can see on the slides, we have developed our own materials. There are many of them. So under the framework of the MOEA, we established a cross-departmental platform. There is a catalyst center, a byproduct center doing research. Why do we need a catalyst center? Because we want to work as a design house. When it comes to CCU, that is carbon capture and storage, when you capture carbon, how do you convert the carbon into chemicals such as methane and methanol? And we have been working with the CSC. So you need good capture to produce good products. And also, you need to support that with green energies. So we have been doing quite well. We enjoy some success in terms of this strategy. And I'm going to use this Fujisawa Township as an example. This is a smart town. Well, previously, it was an old premise of Panasonic's TV production facility. But now this has been converted into a sustainable community, and everything is self-sufficient. So based on this model, we established our smart green petrol station. There are 4 of them in Tainan and also in Hualien, in Taoyuan. A total of 4 smart petrol stations. They produce their own PV energy, and also we incorporate battery storage. So there's power generation and power storage. There is an EMS system, energy management system. And also we have conducted research on soft carbons, and we are trying to commercialize these new technologies by establishing our own facilities. And you can see some charging piles. And last year in Fuling Station, we installed 10 piles for EV charging. Well, actually, there were only 18,000 EVs last year, by the end of the last year, and it only accounts for 0.3%. However, as oil prices are increasing, we're going to see more EVs, and there's going to be some subsidies and grants. So when you visit our charging station, you can also enjoy coffee. We have our own brand coffee. Have a rest there for 10 or 15 minutes, and then the charging is completed and you're off. You're good to go. So we now offer EV charging, and in the future we're going to offer hydrogen charging. And there is also eco-friendly production at our company in African countries. In our facilities over there, the production process is eco-friendly, and we have CCU and CCS technologies. Well, there are such technologies available, but they are expensive and yet to be matured, and we need to cut their cost. And these are some of other things we have been doing. We have been negotiating with Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. We want to capture 1 million tons of carbon for methane production. And also the rest of the carbon will be captured and stored. And our cooperative project with CSC, we signed an MOU with them so that they could use our systems to produce methane and methanol. And we hope to contribute 2.9 million tons per year and clean hydrogen. They have been successful in terms of trials. The hydrogen produced in Australia has been shipped from the Victoria port to Japan. However, it's very small. The shipment is very small. But if we want to reproduce this successful model of hydrogen, the hydrogen has to be reduced in terms of temperature to 253 degrees Celsius, minus 253 degrees Celsius, so that it is liquefied and can be shipped to every port in the world. Well, the LNG ships is about 150 cubic meters. And in the future, this is going to be bigger in terms of liquefied natural gas in order to meet Japan's clean hydrogen strategy. And last year, we established our hydrogen charging station. And this year, we're going to introduce a pilot station. And I've asked one of my colleagues to work on this mission to tap into our strengths. We already had LPG stations. This was not very successful, but the government once promoted this. But now we're going to convert these LPG stations into hydrogen stations. And in the future, there's going to be a huge demand for hydrogen.
Okay, this is geothermal energy. I'll just talk about this very quickly. Right, I know that my time is running out. So this will be the last page. CPC is not just a company in Taiwan. In the future, we'll be a clean power company. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Please remain on the stage because we are going to proceed to the panel discussion. May I invite all the speakers onto the stage? Mr. Wang Xiqing, President of CSC, Mr. Xu Zhaohua, Vice President of Taiwan Power Company, Mr. Casey Chou, Senior Vice President of ASE Group, and also our moderator, Dr. Christine Hu from US TV News. We're going to take a picture first before we proceed to the panel discussion. Please remove your masks and give us your most beautiful smile. Please look at the cameras in front.
谢谢。好，请看着前方的摄影机。
Please look at the cameras. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's capture this moment. Thank you.
台湾的节能减碳不仅是各自努力，而且还强强联手。
In Taiwan, we want to achieve carbon neutrality, and all these leading companies are working together. I believe that this will going to help us. Let's welcome our moderator, Dr. Christine Hu. I'm giving the floor to the moderator. Now, we haven't been to Kaohsiung for a while because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm really very happy to see so many of you here. We don't even have enough chairs for all of you. So thank you for coming to this forum. Like all of you, I listened very carefully to the presentations. I also made a lot of notes. So here I have a few questions for our speakers. The first question is for Mr. Lee from CPC. Well, Mr. Lee just concluded his presentation. So my question for Mr. Lee is this. Now, in the last 2 years, you actually imported 2 shipments of carbon-neutral LNG from Royal Dutch Shell. The first one was in March 2020, and the second one was in November 2020. So with heard this from your presentation, but why is this important for Taiwan's carbon neutrality roadmap? Why is it important for CPC? Thank you, Dr. Hu, for the question. CPC, like TSMC, we are all working on ESG. So, in fact, the Environmental Protection Administration did not really recognize what we did. But despite that, we still imported the shipments of carbon neutral LNG because it's important for the world. We signed an MOU with TSMC in September, but we didn't disclose certain information because we still had some details to work out. So we imported more than 19 million tons of LNG. That's for TSMC. And in terms of forestation, I think forestation is also one of the measures that we take. And as I mentioned earlier, we also have high efficiency facilities in other countries. So, of course, some of these products will be more expensive for companies. Now, the carbon neutral LNG shipments are in fact more expensive because we have to pay carbon prices. Now, in Taiwan, if we want to offset carbon emissions, we are not able to resort to forestation, for example. But in Indonesia, you can do that. And this is why we believe that it's quite important for us to source carbon neutral LNG. So this is a voluntary action. And in the future, we'll continue to provide carbon neutral products. Right. I think in addition to carbon neutrality, we have also heard another keyword, LNG, liquefied natural gas. CPC is importing more and more LNG. Now, people are shifting to LNG, using LNG to replace coal because the LNG emissions are only half of those of coal. Now, I want to ask Mr. Wang from CSC a question. I remember one slide from your presentation. You talked about your 5 green strategies. So in fact, you are also looking at green energy as well, not just steel products. Now, so does that mean that in the future, CSC will not just be a steel company? Last year, we celebrated our 50th anniversary, and we also spent about 1 year to devise a sustainability strategy for our next 50 years. We will have 2 pillars. The first one is that we have to produce value-added steel products. We are learning from TSMC. We hope to become the TSMC of the steel industry. So we have to provide high-quality, advanced steel products. It's just like Morris Zhang of TSMC said, we need to have advanced technology, advanced manufacturing, and also trust from our clients. And in addition, we also have to work on green energy. So in terms of green energy, we'll focus on first one, renewables. In 2016, we set up a company within our group. So on top of our roofs and on top of our ponds, we installed PV panels. Now we already have 87 megawatts in terms of installed capacity. And by 2025, the capacity will exceed 100 megawatts. And this will be used internally. In addition, we are also investing in offshore wind power. We are working with CIP. We are working together, and we are building wind farm 29, which is called Zhongneng. And we won the bid in 2019. And we were awarded 300 megawatts in terms of capacity. This wind farm will be completed in 2025 and will be connected to the grid. And this will provide 1.1 billion kilowatt hours of electricity to us. So we need to use green energy, and we will generate our own green energy. I think energy transformation is very important, and we also have to think about justice issue. We are a big consumer, so we have to generate our own power instead of just trying to compete for green energy with small companies. We have also set up Xingda Underwater Foundation Company. So we are really working from scratch. And last year, we built 6 underwater foundation, and this was done completely in Taiwan. In fact, it's very complicated to produce underwater foundations, and the technical barrier is also a lot higher. Currently, in Taiwan, only Xingda has the capability to produce underwater foundations 100% in Taiwan. And CSC, we provide materials for engineering projects. So we are also going to work on auxiliary devices such as energy storage facilities. We have also materials that are used in lithium batteries as well. And this is why we are also going to look for opportunities in the material industry. Now, previously, I was also thinking about underwater foundations in wind power farms. Now, if you're building a foundation underwater, of course, it's a lot more complex. Now, my next question is for Mr. Xu from Taipower. He also mentioned that Taipower looks at 3 aspects: supply, demand, and grid. So can you give us a bit more details? We also previously talked about carbon capture. Now, but what about grid? Are you also using AI and other technologies in your grid planning? So this is my first question. The second question is about demand side. Everybody is using a lot of power. So if you want to cut carbon emissions from the demand side, you don't want people to use that much energy, but this is going to be difficult because a lot of companies are setting up factories in Taiwan. Many Taiwanese businesses that were operating overseas are now back in Taiwan. So power consumption may not decrease. So what do we have to do? 2 questions for you.
Thank you. I would like to respond to Chairman Li. He was talking about neutralize the LNG. I really need this because if you look at the use of natural gas, 80% is used in the power sector. So if we can get carbon neutralized LNG from your company, then this will largely reduce our pressure. So I'm going to answer to your 2 questions. So how do we reduce carbon on the supply and on the demand side? Well, when it comes to supply, we are building a new grid, a better grid, because there are so many new renewables. I think these are gifts from nature. We rely on solar power, we rely on wind. So we have to dispatch the energies cleverly. That is why we need relevant technologies. We need to rely on digital technologies, incorporating these AI technology, digital technology into our systems. So AI and digital transformation are the basic elements. And then also when our engineers go on site for inspection, we can use drones for inspection, and also they are going to wear smart glasses, smart goggles. And another thing is that usually PVs are installed in rural areas. And we will need better cabling in these places. So infrastructure is going to be key. And also, Mr. Wang was talking about offshore wind. This is rapidly growing by large amount. And of course, eventually, the power will have to be transmitted from off the coast to the land. So we have to build a lot of substations. And we would like to make these pledges to you. We cannot solely rely on the Thai power company. We need all of your support. How about demand? Of course, it's really tough to reduce energy demand. Even if people are cutting their energy use, trying to save energy. But so many use of energies, for example, transportation, has been shifting their carbon emissions to the power sector. In the old days, scooters were powered by fuels, but now as people are getting more e-scooters, then the carbon emissions is being transferred to the power sector. For example, during the Lunar New Year, I went back to my hometown, to my parents' house, and I was using the kettle, and it has a 5-grade power certificate, which meant it consumed more power than the refrigerator in my parents' house. So immediately I bought my mother a more energy sufficient kettle. And I would like to share a story with you. I have a smart meter. And even though I don't usually stay at home because I work in another city, by checking the smart meter, I know when my wife is home. So I think this is a gradual process. I really resonate with what you said. I was thinking that we want to ask you to reduce carbon usage, but it's hard because we just so much electricity per day. But now I think I've been doing pretty well. While 5 years ago, I replaced all the refrigerator, my air conditioners with more energy efficient devices, because at the time there were government grants and subsidies. And my refrigerator is really smart. Just by pressing a few buttons, it made smarter adjustment to help you to save energy. And I know it's really hard if you want people not to turn on their air conditioner, but maybe we can encourage people to use more energy efficient devices to replace their old devices. This also helps them to save money because it cuts electricity bills. Now, I have been looking at your slides, and I think we care a lot about inventory taking of carbon, because you have to know how much carbon you're emitting in order to cut emissions, in order to reach carbon neutrality. So you have been talking about there are 3 scopes of carbon inventory. So I am targeting the ASE's Scope 3 emissions. You are a big player in the industry. You have been urging your supply chain partners to take inventory of carbon emissions with you. I know you are a carbon-intensive, energy-intensive user, but it's going to be hard. I know. Well, when you talk to your suppliers about carbon intensity, carbon inventory, some of them are aware of this issue because they work with international partners. But many of them do not know what this is, and they don't know why you're making these requirements, making these inquiries. I provide good quality products to you. As a supplier, I do this. Why are you asking me this? So at the beginning, they had no clue. But over the past 3 years, we worked very hard, and we organized a convention for suppliers. And 2 years ago, we started to present sustainability awards to suppliers to raise their awareness so that they know why we're doing this. And next step is to provide guidance to help them to achieve the goals. I think carbon inventory is very important. So people have been talking about carbon reduction and energy conservation for years. But where can you start and how much can you save? So example, we need to use water, we need to heat water to for cleaning the flux, and so it still requires energy. So we start to think perhaps we can lower the temperature of the water needed. And then we started to ask our supplier, can you produce a machinery that provides room temperature water? So from 60 degrees Celsius of water to room temperature, it actually saves a lot of energy. So what we do is to raise the awareness of our supply chain partners across the world. And also we provide them with evaluation, how much electricity they use per unit of output. So in the old days, they only focused on high output, but we want them to start to take into consideration the amount of electricity they use, start from the design of their production process, because once the design is fixed, is set, it cannot be changed easily. So they have to think about what their output is and how much electricity is used, and to increase the efficiency. So Mr. Zhou, I was really touched by what you said. I think all big corporations should follow your steps. I'm sure that not everyone in the supply chain know about international trends, know about carbon inventory taking. So bigger corporations must support their suppliers in doing these tasks. But I don't think you have to overthink about carbon reduction. It's actually simple. For example, you had your lunch box. You brought your own cutlets for enjoying the meal. Then you help to reduce carbon. Well, I'm going to talk. So I know ladies would like to buy new dresses, but over the past 2-3 years, I rarely buy new clothes. And my husband was wondering whether I want to save money, but no, I want to save the planet. Because I have been seeing all the pollutions, like Chairman Li said. Well, you know, old clothes become a very important source of pollution. So if you can, if you don't throw that many clothes away, you can actually help to reduce carbon emissions and pollutions. Now, back to Mr. Li from the CPC. I ask you the same question in Taipei. Like you said, you will provide less and less petrol, but in the future, you are going to provide EV charging and hydrogen charging. I would like to know more about your charging stations. Where are your green energy powered EV charging stations? How many in Taipei? How many in Kaohsiung? And you actually have offer your own brand coffee. People can enjoy your coffee there. Is that free? I knew I asked this in Taipei. Thank you. Thank you, moderator. Well, before I answer this question, I would like to add something about the TSMC's work with us. In addition to ESG efforts, we take into consideration Apple's announcement 2 years ago. They asked their suppliers to reach zero carbon emission by 2030. So our initiatives at the CPC is also helping Taiwanese suppliers to meet the requirements of Apple. So in the future, we will still provide some oil products. It's going to decrease because this is a trend. Oil prices have been increasing. Many of you are probably thinking about buying EVs. Nickel is an important ingredient. It's expensive as well. But in the long term, I think we're going to offer less and less petrol. Actually, 4 years ago, we have been thinking about this issue. Well, in the old days, we said that at the CPC, we offer you petrol. But in the future, we're going to offer you charging and hydrogen as well, and you can enjoy some coffee at our petrol stations. Well, actually, by the end of last year, we built 774 charging piles for scooters. But for cars, the first station was built in Taipei, 10 fast charging piles. So it only takes you 15 minutes to charge your cars. And during that period, you can enjoy some coffee. So park your car there and charge it and buy some coffee from us. So in the future, we're going to be a diversified service provider. And like I said, we have 4 smart petrol stations that generates its own power. It stores its own power. We use our own technologies such as soft carbon that can be used, many other materials that can be used in batteries. So we use our own materials to generate power and store power in the management system in the petrol station. They have their own EMS system. So we have established 4 stations, and in Hsinchu this year, the 5th is going to be established. So we hope that this is going to be a power grid in the communities. I know this may involve a lot of regulatory issues, so in the short term, we might not achieve this goal, but we will make long-term planning. We are not unique in terms of our EV charging service because it is available in many buildings nowadays. However, hydrogen involves high safety risks. That is why this is going to be a niche of our business, and we have been evaluating the possibility of hydrogen charging stations, and we have now a pilot project, and we would like to import liquefied hydrogen to replicate our success story of liquefied natural gas. So eventually, we are going to provide you oil products as well as EV charging service and hydrogen charging. And there is going to be another 8 piles in Hsinchu, but eventually we are going to reach 59 piles. And I know that they are, according to the statistics, this January, there are around 18,000 EVs in Taiwan, which means we're going to build even more charging piles. Well, actually, by the end of the last year, cup and Go was available in more than 60 stations, and our coffee is from Guatemala, high quality coffee beans, and we use high quality fresh milk in our latte, and it's really cheap. It's not expensive at all. Well, as for getting free coffee, well, it depends what we are going to do in the future. We can talk about this. Well, of course, the focus is to diversify our business as well as to increase our brand image when we offer coffee at our petrol stations. But our focus will be in introducing even more energies for Taiwan. So how much is your coffee? I know it's $160 at Starbucks. It's really cheap, $55 for a cup of latte. High quality milk from renowned brands. And $45 for black coffee. And we offer a lot of discounts. And this coffee will be available at 100 stations by the end of the year. And hopefully, eventually, you will be able to get our coffee at all stations across Taiwan. Well, I said this in Taipei. Perhaps when people go to your petrol station and spend more than $100, they get a free coffee. How about that?
Right. My next question is for Mr. Wang from CSC. Now, I've hosted 2 panel discussions, and I can see that leading companies are actually moving very fast to cut carbon emissions and to reach carbon neutrality. You mentioned the use of green energy. You also talked about cogeneration. In fact, you also have leading customers such as Tesla. So if we look at your current progress, would it be possible for you to, in fact, reach your goals by 2030 instead of 2050? Well, in fact, the task is very difficult because the steel industry is a so-called traditional industry. What that means is that in the past, we already worked a lot to improve our process. So it is very difficult to do even more to drive down our cost and to cut carbon emissions. But as I mentioned earlier, we face mounting pressure. So I think perhaps we will come up with even more measures to cut our emissions. As I said in my presentation, in the short term, what we are aiming for is to cut carbon emissions because a lot of technologies are yet to be developed. This is why in the first stage, we are identifying opportunities to cut carbon emissions. and we also have to identify opportunities. So this is what we have to do before 2025. And of course, we can also at the same time try to cut our costs. We in fact cut our costs by 5.2 billion last year. And what this means is that cutting energy use and cutting emissions are also helpful. But I think what we really have to think about is our medium-term and long-term goals. We recruited a lot of foreign experts and consultants, and they said that the roadmap to carbon neutrality is a high-risk journey. So along this journey, we need to really chart a good path. We need to identify technologies that we need. We also have to invest resources. So basically, what we are working on now is that we are investing in new energies. We cannot wait. In addition, we need a lot of green hydrogen, and we have to find sources of green hydrogen. So we are thinking about moving some high-emitting processes abroad. We don't always have to start from scratch. We should go to a market that supplies green energy and green hydrogen. Perhaps this is a better solution. So all these are some of the possible measures that we are thinking about. So you asked whether we can reach our goals earlier than scheduled. We are really doing our best. Well, I heard your progress. This is why I wanted to ask this question. Okay, I have one more question for you. This is also something that I want to ask. Why is it that the souvenirs provided by your AGM, the annual general meeting, are so popular? I think this is a question that, this is not so important. Sorry, I'm just joking. The real question is this. You are working with Delta, and you are going to develop energy conservation and storage facilities. So can you share some details? We know that if we want to develop green energy, we also have to work on energy storage. So what's your cooperation with Delta? Well, the souvenirs, we are actually really working very hard to come up with very beautiful souvenirs. Okay, we've been working with Delta for at least 15 years. It used to be that Delta came up with proposals and asked us to find solutions. So Delta needed many components, and we provided them with suitable materials to produce components. This time around, we have a joint lab, and the way we work is that this time around, CSC comes up with questions, and Delta tries to find solutions. So in terms of energy storage, this is an area we didn't really pay much attention to. But we know that renewable energies are not always very reliable for the moment. And this is why we also have to use energy storage systems. Now, earlier this month, there was a very widespread blackout in Taiwan. which means that the grid itself is not resilient enough. This is why we have to work on energy storage as well. So at CSC, what kind of storage systems do we need? We put this question to Delta, and Delta said that we need a multifunctional storage system. The first one is AFC. It's basically something that is going to be used in Taipower's electricity trading system. Secondly, we generate a lot of solar energy, so we have to have a storage system that can basically store excess power generated by our PV panels. And the stored energy can be used in the evening when the solar panels are not really working. And also, when a power supply is not stable, the storage system will help us as well. So this year, we are going to complete a storage facility with a capacity of 4 megawatts. Now, we heard a lot from our speakers. Mr. Xu also provided us with a lot of details. Electric vehicles require charging piles. And Delta, in fact, also worked on recharging piles. And the piles can be used by EVs of different brands because the specifications have been merged. Okay, I have another question for Mr. Xu from Taipower. Mr. Xu, my question for you. In your presentation, you actually mentioned some statistics. We really have to pay attention to carbon emissions. Now, in Taiwan, our energy mix is still dominated by fossil fuels, which is high polluting and high emitting. So if we talk about thermal power, coal-fired 35%, and gas-powered 42%. So that's quite a lot. And green energy only makes up 6.3% of the energy mix. So my question is, what is Taipower's plan to increase its green energy portfolio? This includes solar energy, wind power, and so on. So how are you going to develop renewable energy? Thank you for the question. I want to respond to Mr. Li's comments. He talked about coffee at petrol stations. This is actually quite important. Now, in Kaohsiung, you have tramway, and when the tram stops, it has to be recharged. So Taipower needs to build a lot of facilities around tram stations, including substations. So it actually takes a little bit of time to charge the vehicles. And this is why something like a cafe is quite important. So why am I talking about this? Now, this has to do with the evolution of the power utilities. Once again, I have to apologize on behalf of Taipower about the blackout in early March. In fact, these problems happen because of our history. Many of our power plants are built quite close to each other, so the location is quite concentrated. And many power plants have been expanded, but it has been difficult to build new power plants because of NIMBYism. People don't want power stations near their homes. So we have several very big power stations, power plants. They are in northern, central, and southern Taiwan. And these big power plants basically generate a lot of power. But unfortunately, one such big power plant was down. This is why there was a blackout early this month.
That is why we've been working very hard to build green energies and to improve the grid, because green energies basically is a decentralized model. So when one point is down, as it is a decentralized system, other points in the system can support the power generation. So as a developer, Taipower has been working on green energies, but the market has been liberalized. We do not want to compete with the private sectors. So we spend our money on bigger facilities, which requires a lot of capital. For example, we build offshore wind farms. This requires a lot of huge capital expense. As for smaller PV installations, we leave that to the private sector. Of course, we also welcome bigger PV installations from the private sectors. However, this will all have to rely on the Taipower's grid, so that we are trying to build a better grid to incorporate all the renewables, including PVs and offshore winds. Like I said previously, with so many renewables, the grid can be unstable. We really have to improve the stability of the grid. There's a electricity trading platform, there's power storage, and there's ancillary services used to cut peak so that the power grid can be more stable, even with so many green new renewables. Well, compared with previous years, 2 years ago, there was little rain, so there was little hydropower, but there's more rain, so we have sufficient hydropower at our reservoir, but there would be no PV storage, PV power. We don't have to worry about that. There's a power plant at Deji Reservoir and another one at Qingshan and at Guguan. So these reservoirs across Taiwan will produce power. So when there is a rainfall, actually there will be 7 times of generation at each of these reservoirs, at each of these hydropower plants. And speaking about wind power, so it's about 15% for PV if we talk about the coefficient, but it's many times more when it comes to offshore wind. So you talked about the energy trading platform. I would like to ask a follow-up question. So there is a platform available provided by Taipower, and information is available online, and there are more than 1 million. There are more than 1 million certificates. However, 99% has been bought by the TSMC. So that is why green energies are so important, because most of the 1 million certificates are bought by the TSMC. What if the ASE group also wants to buy some certificates? And as you said, the Thai power company distributes power, transmits power. So you need to build your power grid. But how can you increase the market, have a bigger market of energy trading? Well, there are two types of trading platforms. One is energy trading platform, which is about ancillary services. And another one is green energy trading service, which is taken care of by the BSMI. It provides matchmaking services. Why is everything bought by the company T? What is company T, Tesla or TSMC? Well, I do not reveal individual customers' information. But anyway, it's all about prices. There is a trading platform for green energies. However, very often it's all about bilateral contracts between two companies. So, for example, there's a big energy provider, and its energy is bought by another company because the two has already signed a contract. So, for example, when there is a green energy development project, a lot of buyers would go to them. So, at the ASE, you should also target a specific energy provider before their energy reaches that platform. You just go and talk to them directly and sign a contract with them. Well, as for green energies generated by Thai Power, they are not available on the trading platform. We actually have 1.45 billion kilowatt hours of green energies generated by us, and this we keep these in our own system. They are not traded because we also have to meet our carbon emission targets. Well, I didn't know that. Actually, big corporations could go to green energy producers. So they're going to, the prices are more expensive. Well, they would negotiate. It depends on the cost of development. For example, how much it costs to produce PV, and you have to factor in the prices of certificates. So this is all about a market mechanism. So I shouldn't have worried about this for the ASE. You already have channels to buy your green energies. So, well, during your presentation, I think you have performed very well. So I have questions for the ASE. Well, the ASE stock prices are very stable, and you have been doing very well in terms of your recycling of hazardous waste. Actually, you recycle 64% of your hazardous waste and 93% of your general waste. And this session is broadcasted online, and I'm sure a lot of people are interested in how to recycle more waste. So could you share your experience with these SMEs? Thank you. Well, you recycle things and then put them into new uses. That's one kind of recycling, but also if you incinerate your waste and the heat generated can be put into other uses, that's also called recycling. So what we are trying to do is to reduce the amount of waste in the first place, to reuse materials. For example, we've been talking about Tesla. There are boxes of wafers to be tested and package it in our company, and the boxes can be recycled. As for the foams used in the packaging materials, we also send the foams back to Company T, to Tesla, so that they could reuse these foams. So what we are trying to do is to reduce the waste in the first place, because if waste is generated, and even if you try to recycle and reuse the waste, you still consume certain energy. Well, actually, I've tasted breads produced by your company, by the CSE, so we can see how good the employee benefits are at the CSE. So now CPC sells coffee, CSC produces bread, and Thai Power Company produce ice lollies, and ASE produces garbage bags. I was impressed by your garbage bags because I'm a housewife and I am really interested in your product. Do you sell that? If you do, I can promote it for you. And then you can contribute to your carbon reduction initiative. Well, we actually have received more requests than we can produce. Well, my last question is also for Mr. Lee from the CPC. Well, actually, I talked about this in my show. This is a question about the TSMC. You signed an MOU on LNG with the TSMC. So can you reveal more details to us? Well, yes, there are, but I cannot make announcements here. Could you just reveal a little bit? Well, of course, there's a lot of confidentiality issues, but the general goal is to move toward carbon reduction. So the goal is to have this voluntary carbon management platform. There is a quota system that requires certification. So first, you have to take inventory, and then your carbon emissions must be offset. So, for example, there's a forest in Indonesia, and by working on forestation, you can offset your carbon. Because the emissions during the production of the LNG is offset by the forestation efforts. So we know that the TSMC has some programs in their factories, and of course carbon issues are involved. That is why they want to work with us. And at my company, we are working on carbon storage, capture, and utilization. For example, at our Dalian refinery, there's a pilot project. So this is going to be a demo site for carbon capture and used in methanol. So we start from little amount at the kilogram level, but we want to move toward larger amounts. Of course, the purity of carbon dioxide is very important for the production of these chemicals. So, of course, this will also mean a lot of technological requirements for carbon capture and utilization. That is why we are going to work more with other businesses such as the TSMC in the area of CCUS. I've learned a lot from today's forum.
Now, I think I would really very much like to get a cup of latte from CPC and some bread from CSC, and then an ice lolly from Taipower. And then all the garbage produced will be put into the garbage bag produced by ASE. I think that would be a wonderful afternoon. Now, as we mentioned earlier, carbon neutrality is no longer just a slogan. Everyone has to work towards carbon neutrality. Without such efforts, you will not be able to access funding. You will lose your market. So if you are a company, you have to think about what you have to do. And if you are an investor, you also have to follow what companies are doing to fulfill their ESG responsibilities. Once again, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hu, for moderating today's panel. I would also like to thank our speakers, Mr. Wang from CSC, Mr. Xu from Taipower Company, Mr. Zhou from ASE, and Mr. Li from CPC. Thank you very much for attending this forum. Carbon neutrality will definitely dominate discussions in the next 10 to 20 years. Now, this concludes today's forum. Thank you very much for your participation. I wish you all the best. Let us work together to create a better future. Thank you.